Bantam Audio Publishing presents The Better Part of the End of the Road. It's often said that chivalry is the better part of valor. We say it a lot, but I'm not sure if anybody knows what it means. I'm sure I don't. But what I think it means is that honesty and strength in the face of crummy deals is the stuff to be admired. Of course, that and a sense of humor. The folks at the end of the road certainly have a sense of humor, and they've also had their share of crummy deals. Life isn't always what it could be, but it is always interesting, and with a little strength and a little honesty and a lot of laughs, we get through these things until the good times come around again. And they always seem to come around again. If chivalry is the better part of valor, then it is certainly the better part of the end of the road as well. Young love might be the most overrated phenomenon since the disposable diaper. No matter how good it seems looking back on it, it was still an ugly business. Young love is an all-consuming thing that lends full frontal lobotomies to young men and women who should have been celebrating their lingering childhoods. There is another side of love, though, a side that makes up for what it does to us in our faded youths, a side that you have to live a long time for. Argus Winslow had lived a long time, and as he stood beside his Argus salvage and sales tow truck in front of Ruby's video roundup, trying to muster the courage to go in, he couldn't remember ever feeling so fidgety. Of course, he wasn't remembering a lot of things these days, he had to admit. Ever since he banged heads with Bud Koenig during that New Year's Day fiasco, he'd been having memory lapses. The doctors told him honestly that it might probably, with no real certainty, clear itself up to a point someday, but then it might not. In the meantime, Argus was making the best of 'em, laughing them off as he went, covering up for 'em where he could, and troubling over 'em always. But it wasn't his memory giving him trouble right now. It was his heart. A 67-year-old heart that was beating like a teenager's as he finally pushed through the door into Ruby McClay's video store. Ruby heard the jangle of the bells on the door, glanced up from her catalog, and did a double-take. Well, if it isn't the old junkyard dog himself, Argus Winslow. In here to rent Old Yeller again for your dog? No. Argus showed his uneasiness by pulling off his greasy cap and fingering it in front of him. Ruby registered his seriousness and was frightened for a moment. Barney's okay, isn't he? Oh, sure, that dog will outlive us both, Ruby. Argus walked up to the counter, set his hat down, and got to business. What Argus Winslow might lack in courage, execution, or style, he made up for in plain, straight-ahead forwardness. Ms. McClay, they're having that big fish fry over at the lodge Friday night, and I was wanting you to go eat with me. Ruby McClay looked her old friend in his rugged red face and smiled an old friend's smile with just a little bit more. Mr. Winslow, she said, imitating his manner, I'd be honored to go eat with you. Well, Argus was warmed and calmed by her answer, and demonstrated this by putting his hat back on and leaving. He paused on the way through the door and over the jingling bells called over his shoulder, I'll be here with the tow truck at 6. Ruby smiled after him over what a little boy Argus seemed. Then she took stock of herself and smiled even deeper at what a little girl she felt. You see, Argus Winslow and Ruby McClay have been circling each other for years. When Ruby came to town a quarter-century ago, Argus had already been here 20 years. Ruby was one of the few single women to ever venture out to the end of the road, and being a trim, 35-year-old red-headed fireball didn't hurt her popularity any. She'd have 5 to 6 suitors tethered around her at one time, but she never seemed to show any enduring interest toward any particular one of them. By the same token, Argus couldn't seem to give a whit for Ruby. He was nice enough to her when he was around, but he never got goofy-eyed like the other men. Those first few years, whenever Ruby would walk into a room full of men, voices would raise, postures would improve, pocket combs would be drawn and fired, and she'd have as many drinks in front of her as there were guys in the place. Every guy but Argus, that is. Argus would look up, maybe tip his hat, then return to whatever argument he happened to be having at the moment. Argus was a real dilemma for Ruby. She'd known men she couldn't hook before, but she'd never known one that wouldn't at least sniff the bait. Ruby knew it couldn't be her, and her woman's instincts told her it must be somebody else. Argus was no celibate. She could sense that for sure. He must have a companion, someone, somewhere, he was being true to. Ruby's instincts were good ones, and although she couldn't be certain about Argus's girlfriend in Anchorage, she could see the before and after difference in the man around his monthly scrap-selling trips. He'd leave town short-tempered and struggling along with a fifth-wheel trailer loaded to the gills with scrap iron, then come back with an empty truck, a crooked grin, and a walk that came right off the balls of his feet. Ruby rested her graying head on her open hand at the video store and wondered what had changed for the man that he'd start coming around after all these years. Argus Winslow poked around a pile of rusty water heater tanks out at the junkyard and pondered the same thing. In the less than romantic din of metal tanks having the pressure valves beat off them with a crowbar, Argus thought about the circumstances at hand. How after 25 years of avoiding the subject, he was making a move on his favorite lady. Of course, he'd never let her know she was a favorite, but he was busy enough with Dolly most of that time. You have to understand that Argus Winslow lives his life by a few hard and simple rules, and 2 of them concerned women. The first one was always tell the truth to a woman because they can smell a lie. The second rule was never get mixed up with more than one woman at a time because of the first rule. Argus's friend Dolly was the perennial bartender at his favorite Anchorage watering hole, and for 30 years he'd been warming a stool at her bar and a seat at her breakfast table whenever he got to town. It was a relationship built on laughter, nonsense, and naughtiness, and gave Argus and Dolly each what they needed for the last halves of their lives so far. Well, Dolly took sick and left the state sometime around Halloween, and Argus's eyes started to wander about the same time his memory did. Better go talk to Ruby before I forget what to do with her, Argus thought. And that's exactly what he'd done. Argus finished knocking the last of the valves off the water tanks and stood up to survey his work. "Barney?" The black dog at his side leaned against his leg. "I can't for the life of me remember why I did that." Argus dressed carefully in his trailer Friday night. He'd spent the afternoon trying to make the front seat of his tow truck respectable, but it was fruitless. Too many years of rusty car parts, empty oil cans, and a Labrador retriever. Argus could only hope that Ruby had the sense to wear dark clothes. As far as his own clothes went, he was pulling out all the stops. He had a fresh, red-checked flannel shirt that barely buttoned over his belly, and a brand-new pair of canvas bib overalls in case the buttons failed. Argus was feeling so infected with the spirit of the evening ahead as he slicked his remaining hair back in the mirror.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?